Hi, everyone. My name is Shira Myro, and I'm here with my partner, Dr. Alexa Altman. And we are here to demystify a lot of your questions around psychedelic assisted therapy. Today, we're going to talk about a very complex subject, which is what went wrong with the FDA approval process and the MAPS clinical trials for MDMA assisted therapy. It's a big subject. We're going to open up the conversation and then we'll provide more links so you guys can get more information about it. But starting off, let's talk about PTSD. Why PTSD and why MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD?
Yeah, I think PTSD is a huge problem in our population. I think 70% of people in the United States will experience a trauma. 5% of the population has a PTSD diagnosis.
That's right. 23% of vets.
Oh, right.
Which
Wow.
is huge.
23% of vets.
Yeah. So that's millions and millions of people who are suffering from PTSD.
And when MAPS, who did the clinical trials for MDMA for the treatment of trauma, in their phase 3 trials, so basically what they did was they took participants, and I think they had 121 participants. They broke them into 2 different groups. Half got the MDMA, half got placebo. And the half that got the MDMA, they took them through lots of initial therapy to prepare them. Then they would have a MDMA-assisted therapy session, have a bunch, 2 to 3 integration sessions, and they did that 3 times.
So 3 exposures.
3 exposures to the MDMA. And the outcomes were amazing. Basically, do you want to drum roll?
Yeah. 86.5 participants with MDMA-assisted therapy achieved meaningful benefit and a reduction in symptoms, and 71% no longer met the criteria for PTSD. And that's astonishing.
Astonishing. And these were severe cases of PTSD.
Treatment-resistant PTSD.
Yeah. So we don't really see those outcomes in clinical research very often. So the FDA granted MAPS expedited review because of how powerful that research outcome was. So I think we were all very surprised when the FDA in August did not approve MDMA-assisted therapy, but there were very good reasons, some of them, for why that was the case. I think we can wholeheartedly say it's still a very promising treatment, but we're not quite there yet.
That's good way.
Maybe we could break it down a little bit.
Yes.
Because we do get this question a lot.
It's true, right? People, there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
Right? Why, if the research was so incredibly promising, what happened?
Yeah.
So I would say first and foremost, the FDA doesn't have a model where they can approve both therapy and a compound together. It doesn't exist. Their main function, the arm that approves drugs, solely approves drugs. So MAPS introduced a type of protocol that included psychotherapy as a vital component to the assisted therapy. And there just isn't a governing board that covers those things. So one would have to be introduced. And currently, as it stands, right, in every state, there's some kind of board of behavioral science or some kind of regulating body that oversees and supervises therapy. And then the FDA, the sort of the federal agency, oversees and approves the safety of pharmacological compounds. So this would be a thing that we hope would come into being at some point soon to address this type of very unique breakthrough therapy.
Exactly, right. It's almost like the necessary boards and reviews just haven't been built yet. So because of that, I think that is actually a big challenge, that they have to put a lot of things in place to regulate, train clinicians to be able to provide this, and law and ethics around psychedelic use.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking about it right now. Like, look at electric car or driverless car technology. Like, it didn't exist before. And now they're trying to accommodate the fact that it's a new technology that is in mainstream use. And so my hope would be that there's initiative around that to create it. We just don't know what it would look like.
Not yet.
Not yet.
So one of their big concerns and it's understandable, is when we were talking about the way they did the research, where half participants got the MDMA and then half got the placebo, which is standard in clinical trials, that everybody who got the MDMA knows they got it because of its psychedelic properties.
Yeah,
and then you can't not know.
You cannot know it.
And then the group that got the placebo knew they did not get the MDMA. So therefore, that clinical trial is called unblinded. And the problem with that is there's different expectancies if you know you got the medicine and you know you didn't. So they're trying to really figure out how to redesign the study and they're doing more phase 3 trials. So it was not the end of the research. They're looking for new ways to design the research so that participants will not know which treatment if they got treatment or did not, which I think is valid, really valid.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also the piece about ethical violations. There was one rogue therapist who, should we get into that or no?
I think so. There's always one rogue.
There's always one rogue off the reservation therapist. It's absolutely a shame that it happened, who was inappropriate and did not display proper boundaries and ethical considerations around one patient. And apparently it was upsetting and it derailed the process to some extent, but I would hope going forward, we really have very rigorous protocols. And interestingly enough, I mean, MAPS, and we trained with MAPS, is very explicit how important boundaries and ethical guidelines are to the process. So I think this rogue therapist just took matters into his own hands. But I think it also speaks to the need to have a regulating body.
Yeah.
That
exactly.
everybody is on board with.
Yeah. And with these medicines, patients are more vulnerable, right? These medications, the duration of the dose lasts up to 6 hours. It's a long time to be in an altered state.
Yes.
And a long time for a patient to be vulnerable to lots of things that could happen. So I agree. And I think good training and monitoring 100% needs to be there. I think, though, something that does come up for me, my bit of protest is, yes, bad behavior. And for the amount of people suffering from PTSD in this country, yes, there's going to be some bad outcomes generally in all new medications and treatments. But the potential is also really there to help save so many lives. So I feel like we're always kind of weighing the cost and the benefit and hopefully get these things tighter.
Yes.
So
yeah.
we have those better outcomes.
I agree. I mean, and PTSD worldwide, right? It's even more so worldwide. Okay. Questions about abuse, misuse, physical dependency.
Well, here's what was amazing. When I read the results of the phase 3 trial, there were no reports of abuse, misuse, and dependence. That does not mean that could happen. It just wasn't present in the phase 3 clinical trial.
Which is really interesting. Which is really interesting because I think a lot of people equate Schedule 1 drugs. And this, I think, is the sort of misattribution of some of these compounds. You know, they're not heroin. It's not crack or, meth the way that we understand it. Like these drugs have very different mechanisms of action, and they're not addictive in the way these other Schedule 1 drugs are.
I think the thing the FDA struggled with is that MDMA can produce euphoria, and the concern that euphoria, somebody might be chasing it. So is that a possibility? I think could be. But again, with the right guardrails and precautions and dosing and being monitored, I think we could also really work to regulate that.
Absolutely. I mean, look at cannabis.
Great point.
Yeah. Look at cannabis, which is addictive.
Which
highly addictive.
And alcohol.
Yes.
I think we could say is, rather addictive and still causes a lot of accidents.
Yes.
And so we can say there's an addictive profile there, but I think still could be addressed.
There was also, I think, an important piece about patients coming back home into an environment that may not be receptive or understanding or even educated about what the psychedelic assisted therapy was and is. And much like, let's say, someone coming out of rehab, when they're coming back into their home environment, that is dysfunctional, has issues that are not conducive to a patient's healing, that I want to say that is a legitimate concern. I don't think it should have been an issue or a reason to say no to the therapy, but I do think educating a family or spouse or whoever the patient is returning to is really important for aftercare.
I think the final thing the FDA struggled with a little bit is that the therapy component was of the MDMA treatment was pretty open-ended, meaning it wasn't like a structured protocol therapy.
Like CBT. It was a little bit more open. I don't say vague.
I think the FDA thought it was a little bit vague.
Okay.
I think that's a good word because these cognitive behavioral therapy treatments have like goals and objectives.
Yes.
And
very concrete.
Very concrete. I think the FDA also doesn't usually address therapy. That's not really their area of specialization.
That's exactly.
So I think it may have been hard for the FDA to be assessing therapeutic modalities. I mean, the therapy component, not the medicine component. So we'll see. Maybe they'll be able to restructure that design with a therapy that feels a little tighter to the FDA's pleasing or liking. But the good news, let's end in the good news.
Yeah.
I think the good news is research has not slowed down in any way.
Yes.
And more trials and outcome research results are coming out. All the major universities, institutions are continuing to do research on these medicines. So our hope is that we will update you.
Yes.
With new clinical trials coming out and the new outcomes.
Absolutely. And stay tuned. I mean, this is an emergent therapy, a breakthrough therapy. It's evolving. What I think you were speaking to is that the train has left the station. So we'll continue to look out for the next iteration of a psychedelic assisted therapy that is ready for approval and can hopefully alleviate the suffering of millions and millions of people who struggle with PTSD.
Yeah. If you have questions related to psychedelics and anything we've talked about today or in any of our videos, please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Or you can find us at
i-psychedelic.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.